Everybody, thanks for watching and thanks for taking the time to purchase and support. And welcome to Ancient History Volume 3. So now, if you've been paying attention, you've seen the first two volumes, of course, by now, you see how this is going. We basically taking it from where the Egyptians was, conquered, and you had the empire taken over by the Greeks and everything that transpired after that. Because when you start looking at history, everything takes place after the fall of Kemet. We see the rise of the European powers. We see the Renaissance and everything like that leading up to, what we know today. But this is where they established this faulty history, and it's biblical, the so-called biblical history that is false. So when you go back into antiquity and you can start tracing from the time when the Egyptian empire fell, what the Greeks was doing and what these people they are talking about in the Middle East, in Egypt or what have you, what was going on with the so-called Jews, the Greeks and the Romans and everything that was happening with the wars of the Diadochi and everything like that. What took place? Because it's in this time that we can uncover the truth. It's in this time that we can see exactly what took place and how they was able to, push in this history. And that's exactly what they did. You have the truth and you have this history that they made up. And what they did was, as I showed you guys, they basically piggybacked off of real Greek history and been able to basically show what the Greeks was doing in the wars of the Greeks, that, there's actual proof of these wars, and then basically put themselves in the Greek shoes, but as Jews. So all these so-called wars that the Jews was fighting is talking about in Genesis and everything like that, that supposedly the Jews was going out and conquering and fighting and everything. But when you go and look for that, you're going to see evidence of war, but not of the Jews. So as I showed you guys, it's really the Greeks talking about themselves and their wars and their battles that they had, along the way. This is what this is about. So when you get that aspect of it, it's still a lot of things that they have to explain and put in place. One of the major things will be, first of all, how is it that you had Hellenization going on, the Greeks going around, instilling all these beliefs and conquering everything. And basically, as I showed you with the wars of the Diadochi, how they divided up the land. So how we have this going on in Hellenization in process, but for some reason, these Jews are allowed to practice Judaism. What is that? So this is how you really start to pay attention and reveal what really took place. Because you have in ancient Kemet, we know when they took over, I showed you guys at the museum, Serapis, Zeus Ammon, and all these so-called Greek guys, that everything that they instill in Egypt to try to get the Egyptians to believe. But when you get down to Israel, for some reason, they say, okay, you know what? We're going to take over, but we're going to let the Jews keep the religion and keep following it. What's up with that? And then we know later on, they would follow it themselves. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense for all this to be going on. And then somehow, everybody is just Jews. Christians, everybody following this doctrine of a people that's conquered by a stronger people, supposedly. So when you start looking at it from this point, you can see what took place. But when you start to really know the history and everything behind it, it starts to basically show you the truth, and it makes a lot more sense. So now, as I said, I talked about how they had to go out and make these people. They had to go out and make sure that they can create Jews. They had to create these Hebrews to explain this history, as I talked about in the books of the Bible series. I talked about that in edited Exodus and Leviticus. So definitely you want to see those. But understand, you got to create these people. They had to explain a lot of this history because there is no proof. So if you're going to be trying to interject these people into history, you got to explain certain things that don't make sense. Now, when you're a person that when you know about something and somebody comes and tries to talk about it, if you know everything about the situation, you can tell when they're lying. You can tell. It's like when somebody say they saw a movie and they can't really give you any parts of the movie. It's like, you ain't see that movie. Like, I can tell, I seen it. I don't know what you're talking about. So they have to try to cover for every single part. Every single scholar that's poking holes in the story is always a comeback. You ever see those real bad liars? They always got something, an excuse. They're always saying something to try to basically make up for their story sounding like bullshit. this is exactly what's happening with the antiquities of the Jews and their history. So it's a lot they have to explain and answer for. One of the things they got to explain, they have to tell us how, one, they was in Egypt in the 6th century BCE and how they disappeared. So first of all, one, you got to put yourself there and explain how are you there. And as I said, these people that are there are actually Greeks. And we're going to get into that in a second. But when you understand, when you start going back in history, how are you going to talk about one people and not the other, especially if this one group is supposed to be as glorious and huge as the Jews when you read the Old Testament. So when you have pharaohs and you have documentation of the Egyptians speaking of the Greeks and showing the Greeks, but no Jews, it's telling you, everything is giving you those connections right there that they were the Jews. That's who they're placing themselves to be. So they have to explain, one, how, because this is their claim, that the Babylonians came into Israel and basically took them into captivity into Babylon. Now, what they know is, they understand, and proof a show, that there were Assyrians. The Assyrians was coming into Kemet, and there was always these little wars and skirmishes between the Egyptians and the Assyrians. And the Assyrians would basically take over part of Lower Kemet. So this is them again trying to interject themselves during a period where there's war and stuff happen, because then it's chaos and stuff get lost, and you can't explain everything during a war because it's not going to be so much pieces. It's just going to be remnants of a war. But there's other stories to be told that's basically destroyed and covered up by war. They understand this, so they want to interject themselves into this period of time and say, well, I guess during this time the Babylonians came in and basically took them. Just for some reason, they ain't want no Egyptians. They wanted to, for some reason, just take the Hebrews and take them all the way back to Babylon, these grown-ass men and women, and just enslave them for whatever reason. So this is what they claim, because they have to basically answer for the fact that they're not there during this war. During this time, when you had Psamtik I, who Herodotus talks about, know he exists. This is Egyptian pharaoh. During this time, when Psamtik is basically fighting the Assyrians, we're the Jews. If y'all was there, where are y'all? Greeks was there, but there's no mention of no Jews. And I understand this. So when you read here, it's saying, now this is the military campaign of Psamtik. It says Psamtik won Egypt's independence from the Assyrian Empire and restored Egypt's prosperity during his 54-year reign. The pharaoh proceeded to establish close relation with archaic Greece. Telling you right there, that connection, we know that was there. The hieroglyphics and everything I talk about with them showing the depictions of white men being there. So we know the Greeks was there. And also encouraged many Greek settlers to establish colonies in Egypt and serve in the Egyptian army. In particular, he settled some Greeks at Taphnis. So now, don't let the whole thing fool you about the Assyrians. Understand, the Assyrians, when they talk about the Assyrian Empire, it also includes the Babylonians and the Sumer and the Akkadians. You have the Egyptians successfully defeating the Assyrians, which we would assume would include Sumer, the Babylonians, and the Akkadians. Now, if they can defeat these people, why would they have a hard time or basically lose in the conquest from the Babylonians? Because see, they want you to believe that the Babylonians came into ancient Kemet, defeated the Egyptians, the Babylonians alone. We know there's supposed to have been skirmishes and wars, civil wars in Mesopotamia between the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and the Babylonians supposed to have won. And you got to understand that whole thing when you start seeing Babylonians. Of course, somebody's talking about something biblical. Assyrians, they're talking about historical stuff because that's what, the name that they use. And they try to really differentiate between the two. But mostly when you see Babylon, it's dealing with something biblical. They always throw that in there to give that reference because the Bible's talking about, Babylon, the Babylonians. So, it's tough to believe that they was able to defeat them when the Egyptians had already beaten the Assyrians in a larger army. So now, Necho II, Egyptian pharaoh, son of Psamtik I, named after his father. He takes the throne 610 BCE. This is supposed to be around the time when the Babylonians come in and basically take the Egyptians out of Syria and out of Israel. So now it says here, Necho undertook a number of construction projects across his kingdom in his reign. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Necho II sent out an expedition of Phoenicians, as I talked about before in part one of ancient history. I told you guys the Phoenicians was there in Kemet. Plain and simple. They basically was the Egyptians. The Phoenicians, as I said, the purple people, name given by the Greeks, they were Egyptians. And there's other people who was basically there in Phoenicia to basically run that territory, because it's basically trade grounds. But it's telling you right here that he took the Phoenicians. These are Egyptians. It's just the name they used, the Greeks used, but they were down there, and they were, in Tyre, and we know Israel's along the way. They ruled Israel as well. This whole stretch of lands I talked about, ruled by ancient Egyptians. This is during the ancient Egyptian empire. They had control of this land. So it's saying Necho II set out an expedition of Phoenicians, which in 3 years sailed from the Red Sea around Africa to the mouth of the Nile. Now, this is the important part down here. They say Necho played a significant role in the histories of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and the Kingdom of Judah. Because, of course, they're going to throw that bullcrap in there. This is bullshit. I'm going to tell you why. Necho II is most likely the pharaoh mentioned in several books of the Bible. They can say that with no proof. Where's the proof of that? So, where's his name? They don't want to mention no more names because they already messed up with Ramses. That was a monumental mistake, put Ramses' name in there, knowing it's not going to add up. But it's real easy for them to just come out and say, well, he's the pharaoh probably mentioned in the Bible, to try to fit them in there. That's what it's about. Giving you enough to make it seem like they're telling the truth and that this stuff fits when it's all bogus. They could say anything. Where's the proof to back it up? He had nothing to do with this kingdom. But what they do is, since they understand it was turmoil around this time, it's not so much you can do to find proof. They interject people in these places. And this is one of the things that's weird when they try to interject Jews in servitude of the Egyptians, as if they work side by side. So they give us Jehoiakim. It says here, Jehoiakim was appointed by King Necho II, king of Egypt, in 608 BC. After Necho's return from the Battle of Iran, 3 months after he had killed King Josiah at Megiddo. Now, Jehoiakim was supposedly king of Judah, Judea, however you want to pronounce it. He was the king there. So it's highly unlikely that the Egyptians, Necho II brought him in to basically rule while he was out at war. Why aren't y'all fighting alongside each other? What is he doing there? So again, this is they have to interject these people in to try to make it fit, to make it seem like, the Egyptians and the Greeks was just mingling in there together, but there's no proof of that. Plain and simple. They have to explain how they are in Israel during this time that the Egyptians are in power. And they're trying to make it like, well, they was in servitude to the Egyptians, basically working side by side. The Egyptians was appointing them to do stuff. But it's already giving you that hint when I was just explaining to you how you had, since they know you had Psamtik and you had Necho basically getting the Greeks to work with them. That's documented. That's something we can prove from Herodotus and the Egyptians themselves that says and attests to the fact the Greeks and the Egyptians was living alongside. Where is any mention of the Jews? So they had to put this in there. Well, it was the Egyptians, it was the Greeks and the Jews, but it's no mention of the Jews. But they got to explain for that. They have to explain that. They have to explain why and how they are there and in what capacity are they supposedly in Kemet during this time. There's no mention of them except for, bullshit like this. So now we're talking about the 6th century BCE. We know what's about to happen. We know eventually the Persians are going to come in there and take over Kemet from the Egyptians, right? So the whole question you have to ask yourself is, you have all these stories of the Jews in the Bible going out fighting these wars, conquering the whole nine. I just read to you how Necho II supposedly put a Jew in charge of basically running this area while he was out at war, giving you the hint that you had not only the Greeks working with the Egyptians, but the Jews as well in some capacity. So you would think there's a lot of them there. So the whole thing is, we know that the Persians came over. Now, according to the Jews, supposedly on their way to Kemet, to conquer Kemet, they stopped in Babylon, liberated the Jews. So they liberated the Jews, freed them, beat the Babylonians, came over to Israel, beat the Babylonians there. Now, maybe if it did really happen, which we know it didn't, maybe, you can say that the Persians told some of the Jews that, hey, we're going to Israel, whatever they called it back then, and go ahead and take that land from the Babylonians as well. Y'all should meet us up there, or what have you. But we don't know what the case was. But somehow, they made it up there. But the whole thing, again, is what you would have to explain. Well, there is no evidence or information that the Jews joined with the Persians to beat the Egyptians. They would like to have you believe that, so they can try to make it fit. Like, okay, well, maybe the Jews joined with the Persians since they freed them from Babylon and came up there and helped defeat the Egyptians. But that wouldn't make sense, because you would think they would have been strong enough to beat the Greeks, which they wasn't. So again, as I told you guys before, the whole thing with the Persians coming in was a whole setup by the Greeks in the first place. So we know we had this time. We're talking about the 6th century. The Greeks wouldn't come in and take over until around the 4th century. So around the 6th century, around 500 or something, you had this whole thing happen with the Persians coming in, taking over. You had the rebellion of the Egyptians fighting against the Persians for about 75 to 100 years. Then eventually, once they would regain power of Kemet, then the Greeks would take over. There is no mention of no Jews through none of this. And as I said, during this time, we know we had in Israel was black Egyptians. No Jews. There is absolutely no mention of them in history during this time, in this period. Because again, they got to explain, well, wait a minute. You had some king of Judea, basically ruling in Egyptian Pharaoh's place for a little bit till we came back. How wasn't y'all there to be documented in this war with the Persians in no way, shape, or form? And that's crazy. So they have to basically say, well, during this time, we was away, just got free from Babylon and what have you, or they wasn't there and we came up later after it was over, whatever they want to use. But it doesn't fit with actual history and what we can prove to the fact that we know the Persians came in there and took over and was having these battles. So the Egyptians was able to hold them off and keep them from gaining full control for a long time. As soon as they got full control, what happened? Greeks took over. Okay, so 4th century BCE, we know what's going on. We know the Greeks come in, take over from the Persians, right? They took over. Now you have the Greeks ruling. We know what happened with Alexander dying and the whole wars of the successors, the Diadoches, them basically splitting up the territories. So now the area, Judea, was basically ruled by the Seleucid Empire. And you have Antiochus IV running this thing when you get down to the 2nd century BCE. And, after the wars is basically starting to die down and you understand what was going on around this time, it was Hellenization. And this is the part that, they can't explain this part. There's no way they can really explain it. And the way they do explain it, it don't fit. How, again, everybody is falling under Greek rule. Hellenization is rampant, but for some reason, they are allowing these Jews to exist and do what they're doing. Now, when you start reading through the little stories about all this, they say little stuff like, they would allow the Jews to do certain things, but not really be spiritual about their religion. But they didn't give the Egyptians the same courtesy or anybody else the same courtesy. But somehow, some way, these Jews, who nobody's talking about, was able to exist, and not only exist, practice their religion. It's bogus. It's bogus. So you had Antiochus IV running this whole thing. And you have the Jews, from their history, basically talking about how Antiochus IV was basically mean to them and had all these rules and laws and treating them bad, and eventually they rebelled, which there's absolutely no documentation or proof of Antiochus IV doing anything bad to any Jews. Just that simple. There's no mention of this. There's no proof of that he was even that type of person. So this is where the whole story of Hannukah comes into place, when you understand what happened in Judea. So you have with the whole story, this is where you have Judah, the Maccabee, and the whole story of Maccabees, where you have the Greeks basically take over the Jewish temple, and they're in there and they got pagan idols and all this stuff going on in there. Supposedly, according to the Jews, a lot of the Jews, this is where you see the whole Hellenized Jews, Jewish Hellenization. They want to sprinkle that in there to try to. It doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense for them to be creating these guys, and the whole purpose is Hellenization and getting people to convert and switch over to the beliefs and everything that the Greeks talk about, but allow the Jews to exist with their religion. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Remember, around this time, it's the whole purpose of the Septuagint. Nobody's speaking Hebrew. They all speak in Greek. So if they would go as far as to have everybody speaking Greek, not really nobody speaking Hebrew, and if they would go that far, why would they allow them to practice this religion? Again, when I said the actions of the Greeks doesn't fit the letters of Orestes, and you're going to find out why later on. So, we know it's all bogus. So what supposedly happened is you had Judah the Maccabee and his brothers and a few other people, small army, basically supposedly go up against about 20 to 40,000 Greeks. And they fighting at the Jewish temple. And this small army of the Maccabees defeated the Greeks. Thousands of men, they just somehow defeated them. And it says here, the Maccabees were a group of Jewish rebel warriors who took control of Judea, which at the time was part of the Seleucid Empire. They founded the Hasmonean dynasty, which ruled from 167 BCE to 37 BCE, being a fully independent kingdom from about 110 to 63 BCE. They reasserted the Jewish religion, partly by forced conversion, expanded the boundaries of Judea by conquest, and reduced the influence of Hellenism and Hellenistic Judaism. Now, I wanted to highlight that part, by forced conversion. Let me tell you why. Because as I said, we know these were Africans there, black people. And there's evidence, there's already proof that there was people were forced into this religion, forced into Judaism. So they know when people go back and they start looking at this history, when they start seeing that, why are Jews supposedly forcing Jews to be Jews? Doesn't make sense. But when you understand, and as I said, what Hellenization really was them instilling the Jewish faith, because the Greeks created it. Was no Jewish people. They created the whole thing, and it was forcing it upon the African people that was there, the remnants of the Egyptian empire. Plain and simple. Doesn't that fit? It makes sense. As I said, they was ruling. Israel was their kingdom, the Egyptians. When the Persians came over, of course there was Egyptians still there, because we know they was fighting. And then when the Greeks came, still black Egyptians, Africans, whatever you want to call them, was there. They wasn't gone. They were converted. They tried to give them Zeus Amon, tried to give them Serapis. They wasn't having it. So Hellenization, the whole creation of this whole Jewish faith, was created and forced on them through generational indoctrination. That's basically how you do it. You start out with the kids. Plain and simple. When you teach the kids, they're going to grow up and teach their kids. And you make that system work like that. They had over 100 years to do it, people. They had plenty of time to get this thing going and get the people out spreading it. Plain and simple. So when you find proof that was forced, Jewish faith on people, this is what how they try to hide that fact. So how the story goes with Hannukah is after they somehow defeated this huge army, and this little group defeated this huge army. They came into the temple. They seen the temple was destroyed and a bunch of pagan idols and stuff everywhere. And they basically wanted to light the menorah, which is basically like, you see a Hannukah, the candles or whatever. But they only had enough oil to basically last them a day. And it would take them 8 days to sanctify the oil, to make the oil up or what have you. But somehow, miraculously, somehow through some kind of miracle, that oil that was only supposed to burn for 1 day, burned for 8 days and gave them enough time to make more. And there you have Hanukkah. And they didn't really celebrate Hanukkah until that's a new American thing. Jews wasn't really celebrating Hanukkah until probably like the 1920s, when a lot of Jews was coming into America. But that story sounds more like a myth and a fable, when you understand. Now, of course, you're going to have those religious people that say, well, God was with them. God was with them and helped the oil burn, and God was with them to help them fight, this war. Now, all of that gives, a little bit more validity for them to the Bible when you say, when it's talking about in the Old Testament, how God was helping them fight all these wars against the Amalekites and the Girgashites and the Perishites and all that stuff like that. But in real history, where's these people? These names are not mentioned. But it gets people to say, well, maybe they just got the name mixed up. But we do have proof that this war happened, stuff like that, which, it's not no proof of this war with the Maccabees, no proof. So a lot of people say that. So what happened? You had Demetrius I Soter, who was basically nephew to Antiochus IV. He basically escaped or, left Rome without the permission of the Romans, came into Judea and basically crowned, or Jerusalem or what have you, basically crowned himself king. He said, I'm the rightful king. I'm supposed to be on this throne, and I'm basically going to go kill them damn Maccabees. Now, while this is going on and they're getting their men together, what have you, the Jews were smart. They understood that eventually, Rome would take over. Rome was pulling the strings. And that, the Romans was basically, behind the Greeks, and the Greeks was messing up. They couldn't stop fighting each other, and the Romans would eventually take over. And they went, you had Judah, the Maccabee, and they basically went and signed a treaty with Rome to basically, smooth everything out, say, I know y'all going to take this shit over. We might as well be cool with y'all. But Demetrius I didn't care about none of that. He basically got his men together. He went there and supposedly brought, a bunch of dudes. Now, remember, they just had fought and defeated like 20 to 40,000 men, beat them easily, according to their story. But somehow the men this time said, well, it's too many of them. Let's get out of here. This is their story. It's too many of them. We can't beat all these men. No, let's go. But you miraculously just did this. You just defeated them before, supposedly with God's help. And God going to be with you. Where's the faith? No faith this time. They said, hey, this is how they try to make the story make sense. Hey, it's too many people. Let's get out of here. We can't beat these guys. So they told Judah, the Maccabee, to basically leave. We outnumbered. He stayed. Some men stayed. They got slaughtered. So I guess God wasn't with them that battle. They got beaten, and that was the end. Maccabees lost. Judah Maccabee was killed, and basically, the Greeks took back power, and that's basically what happened. So it's cool that they put a little story together to get people hype about that time, to try to interject them into history. Yeah, we did take over. We won and we defeated this huge army, but they took it back. It takes away the specialness of Hanukkah when you really pay attention to that. It makes it all bullshit, which I believe a lot of Jews believe it was bullshit, which is why they didn't really adopt the whole thing in the beginning. It's more of an American thing, which is why everybody comes together and talks about Hanukkah. But when you really get into the story, it don't fit. It doesn't make sense. And there's no proof of it, by the way. But, they put that in there. And the whole part about them having this special, making them seem like they had divine powers and was divinely willed or, skill to basically fight off these Greeks who were huge. Plain and simple, huge. We know the Greeks pride themselves on, being strong warriors. Sparta is basically an acronym, for sports, where we get sports from. Sparta was about sports. It was about big, strong dudes and the Olympics and all that stuff like that. So to have these Jews be able to defeat thousands of them with their, small numbers, it's crazy. Maccabees, well, it's an acronym for who is amongst the strong like God. Sounds like something, some Greeks to make up anyway. But we know, okay, Greeks got back power. Eventually, the Romans would take over, and the Romans would be in power. They would put Herod basically as king of Judea. And then you have the whole Josephus coming into play. And Josephus, when he's talking about the antiquities of the Jews and the wars of the Jews, he gets into the whole thing with Hannukah and all that stuff like that. All bullshit. But this is where you have Josephus come in, start talking about, this period where the Jews rebel or revolt against the Romans, and they basically, the Romans burn down the Jewish temple, and the only thing that's left standing is, the Western Wall. And this is the wall I always talk about, where all the celebrities go, the so-called Wailing Wall. They go to the wall. Everybody goes to the wall. What's supposed to be the last remnants of the Second Temple. Now, my whole thing is, still no proof of that any of these temples was built. And another thing is, if the entire temple went up in flames, whatever was made of, it looked like it was made of the same stuff as the wall. So you would think, man, if this wall is still here, still standing, still strong, that the rest of the temple would have been standing as well. But they can go there and point to any wall that was built that's high, that looks, amazing, and say, well, this was the wall. Here's the proof that the temple was here, it was burnt down, and this is the Wailing Wall, and everybody comes there, and then, this is why they go to that wall. So now you understand what that's about. It has to do with the whole war of the Jews against the Romans. And it's weird because they did have that treaty, and supposedly the Romans wasn't treating them bad. Who knows what happened? Again, it's a whole nother question you still got to look at, is why would the Romans allow them to come and keep this religion? Remember, another thing, the Romans kept Hellenization going when they took over. So why is these Jews getting this courtesy? What's going on?